I've been trying out some new stuff with my channel lately, so today I'm going to do something a bit different from my normal content. You see, I've been feeling a bit extra nostalgic lately, so I thought it'd be kind of fun to take a trip down memory lane and talk about my first couple times ever playing video games, and just sort of how I got into this hobby. I think that video games are a lot like sex, in that you never forget your first time, and that first time's usually a little bit strange and awkward. And to this day, I still vividly remember the first time I ever played a video game. Actually, this is one of the earliest memories of my entire life. Let's see, this would have been in about 1993, maybe 1994, when I was like 3 or 4 years old. And there's a local Mexican food restaurant chain called Manuel's, and my family went out to eat one night. We went to a Manuel's that was close to us. And the wait was going to be a little bit long, and they had a Pac-Man cocktail cabinet in the waiting room. And if you're not familiar with what the cocktail cabinets are, those are the arcade machines that rather than being mounted up and having the monitor in front of you like this, it's actually on a table and you play facing down like this with the little cocktail sitting on the table next to you here. So on this fateful evening, the wait was going to be a little bit long, like probably something like 30 or 45 minutes. And when you're 3 or 4 years old, that's a long time to wait for dinner. So my parents let my sister and I play on the Pac-Man arcade cabinet that they had in the waiting room there. And this cabinet actually had 2 joysticks, one on each end for 2-player mode where each person would take turns playing, and then the screen would sort of rotate to face the player whose turn it is. Now at this point in time, I was just a little bit too young to understand that before you can play the game, you have to put a quarter into the machine. So I sat my ass down and started moving the joystick around, and my first thought was, oh cool, I'm playing a video game. And then I forget who it was either my dad or my sister, that came along and said, no, you gotta put the quarter in first, then you play the game. And this machine actually had a 2-player mode where, again, you would just take turns playing. And because I was the younger sibling, my sister Deanne went first. I could still remember watching her play with that upside down screen and just not really knowing what the hell was going on. Because again, it was, upside down to me, so I couldn't really see very well. But then my turn came up, and just before I actually started playing, I think my dad explained to me, okay, so when it starts, you'll move the joystick around, which will move Pac-Man, and you want to eat all the pellets that you can. And when it actually started, I was kind of able to grasp that concept right away, which is really impressive because I was not a smart kid. And that just shows how well designed Pac-Man is, that even a stupid 4-year-old kid can pick it up and start playing it right away. So I started playing. I was moving Pac-Man around the screen, and I drove him straight into a ghost right away. And then my sister kindly explains to me, you have to avoid the ghost, stupid. And so when my next turn came up, I'm pretty sure I did try to, but knowing how dumb I was when I was a kid, I probably still drove him straight into another ghost. Now, a lot of the time when I hear other people talk about the first time that they played a video game, a lot of them talk about it like it was this immediate mind-blowing event that completely changed their life right away. And to be honest, it kind of wasn't like that for me. I mean, I do remember enjoying the game right away. Pac-Man's an all-time classic for a reason. But I feel like the reason why I really remember this moment isn't so much because of the game, as much as it's because, well, like many siblings, my sister and I used to fight a lot. And this was one of the few times that we were able to actually really play together that didn't end in a fight, which usually ended with me crying. So that was the first time I played any video game ever. Now the first time I played a console game happened a little bit later, like 1995 or so. And this is another thing that my sister played a very big part in. There was one day when she went over to play at a friend's house, and she must have played some video game there or something like that, because I have absolutely no idea what she did over there. But when she came home, she was pretty much begging our parents to buy us some kind of video game machine. Like, we were, 4 and 5, maybe 6 years old at the time, so we didn't know what video game systems were out there. We just wanted something that would play video games. And luckily, around this same time, our big cousin was moving away to college, and he must have not felt like taking his video game with him, so he just passed it down to us. So we ended up with an Atari 5200, an NES, and a shoebox full of games for each. We brought all this home, and my dad hooked up the NES out in the living room so that Deanna and I could play together, and then we hooked up the Atari 5200 in my room so that I could play it in there. And the only games that I can really remember from those shoeboxes of games, on the Atari 5200 I remember we had Pac-Man and that was it. And then on the NES, I can remember the Super Mario Bros. Duck Hunt combo pack that everybody has at a point, Castlevania, and DuckTales. I really have no idea why my parents hooked up the Atari in my room, because I'm not the one who asked for any video game shit. But I'm glad that they did, because, it started my passion with this whole thing. But anyways, I do remember that in my room at the time, I had the oldest TV that I've ever seen in my life. There was no remote for it, there was just a dial for the volume and a dial for the channels, and it maybe got like 12 channels or so. It was one of those really old ones that even in 1995, you just did not see it a whole lot. But that TV must not have lasted much longer after this, because I can also remember having that Atari hooked up to a more modern TV in my sister's room, and we only had that Atari for maybe a year or so. One of the things that the Atari 5200 was famous for was having really crappy and really unreliable controllers that broke down all the time. And looking back on it, I'm pretty sure that's all that happened with that old Atari 5200 we had. Like, my parents were looking at it, and the controllers weren't working, and in their ignorance, they didn't know that you could just go out and buy a new controller, so they just concluded, well, the whole thing's broken, just throw it away. Before setting that Atari up in my room, we did also set up the NES in the living room, and that played a much bigger part in getting me into video games than the Atari did. I remember setting it up, and immediately I really wanted to play Super Mario Bros. Probably because at the time it was the only video game that I had ever heard of. But my sister Deanne wanted to play Castlevania because she thought it looked cooler, and she was the older sibling, so we played Castlevania first. Even though Castlevania doesn't have a two-player mode, we still just passed the controller back and forth in between lives and played together that way. And because Deanne was the older sibling again, she went first. And I can still remember watching her play the game and just my mind being completely blown away by what I was seeing. And again, you have to remember, at this point in time, the only other video game that I had any kind of reference to was Pac-Man. And when you're going from the really bright, vivid, and playful color palette of Pac-Man to the darker, gothic looks of Castlevania, that's actually a little bit of an unexpected change. Although what's funny is, I guess if you look at those two games today through a more modern perspective, you'd be forgiven for saying that they look very similar to each other. But you really have to remember the time that these games were made in and the time that I was playing them. Back then, we just didn't have the same kind of graphics that we do today. But that did not stop developers from finding ways of making games have their own unique atmospheres. And Castlevania is a terrific example of that. So after we both did a few lives of Castlevania, we finally switched over to Super Mario Bros. And while Castlevania blew my mind away, Super Mario Bros. Changed my life. I still remember setting up that two-player mode. Again, I was the younger sibling, so I was second. And actually, now that I think about it, back then, the only time I ever got to be player one was on the rare occasion that I got to play the Nintendo by myself. And that might be part of the reason why, to this day, I still think that Luigi is actually way cooler than Mario. So anyway, Deanne started playing Mario Brothers, and I don't think she passed the first level on her first try, but I think she got like halfway through it. Then when I had my turn, I'm pretty sure that I ran straight into that first Goomba the first time I ever played it. Either Deanne didn't explain it to me, or I never asked, but I just didn't know that you had to push the A button to make Mario jump to get over that Goomba. So I'm pretty sure that on my second try though, I did get over that Goomba, and then it probably took about another 5 or 6 tries after that for me to clear the first level the first time I ever played it. And then it was probably way more than that for me to finish up the second level. So a couple days later, one of our cousins came over to play, and he was the oldest of the three of us. I think he was like 8 at the time. So he already knew Super Mario Bros. Pretty well, at least, for the time he knew it well. But he showed us how to get to that warp zone at the end of level 2 of Super Mario Bros. And what's funny about that warp zone is anytime I ever see anybody describe the first time they were shown that warp zone, they always describe it in pretty much the exact same way every time. And that's the exact same reaction that I had, which is that I just could not believe that you could actually get on top of the level like that. Like, I remember, even as I was seeing it the first time, I was just like, whoa! You can actually get up there to that part of the level? And it's one of those things where, again, it might seem kind of silly to be impressed by that with the crazy shit that we have in video games today. But in 1995 or so, when this would have been happening, this was the best that it got. Although now that I really think about it, I think that the main reason why these memories stick out in my head so much over the last 25 years or so doesn't really have that much to do with the video games themselves as much as it has to do with what I was talking about back with Pac-Man, which is that when we were kids, my sister and I used to fight a lot, and it used to get vicious. And these are some of the few memories that I have where that just wasn't happening. We were way too busy shooting bricks for any of that crap. Unfortunately, the NES only made it about a year or so longer than the Atari did. And what happened with that was the pins that would connect the cartridge to the console was very common for those to wear down and go out of alignment, and I'm pretty sure that was all that happened with ours. But my parents were ignorant and didn't know it was a common thing that's pretty easy to fix. So they just said, well, the damn thing's broken, so throw it away. Luckily though, by that point in time, I already had my Nintendo 64. And that is a story for another video. Thank you so much for letting me take this trip down memory lane. This video was a lot of fun for me to put together, so if you enjoyed it, please let me know by giving it a thumbs up, and let me know about it in the comments down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here, I upload every Saturday. Please follow me on Twitter, and I hope to see you next time.